the end of the age of the internal combustion engine is in sight. Okay, so we seem to be talking about the internal combustion engine. There are small signs everywhere. The shift to hybrid vehicles is already underway among manufacturers. Okay, so we're shifting to hybrid vehicles. Volvo has announced it will make no purely petrol engined cars after 2019, and Tesla has just started selling its first electric car aimed squarely at the middle classes. Um, okay, all right. So we're giving some kind of an example as to how the shift is happening away from the internal combustion engine, right? So what is this car aimed squarely at the middle classes? The Tesla 3 sells for 35,000 US dollars and in the US, and 400,000 people have put down a small refundable deposit towards one. This kind of information, don't try and remember the numbers and all of that. You can always come back. He's quoting Volvo and Tesla as an example to show that we're moving away from the internal combustion engine. Continuing the example, several thousand have already taken delivery. So it's talking about the Teslas, and the company hopes to sell 500,000 more next year. This is a remarkable figure for a machine with a fairly short range and very limited number of specialized charging stations. So despite the fact that you do not have a lot of charging stations, people are still buying Teslas in the hundreds of thousands, right? So that is a way for him to kind of emphasize on the shift. There might not be charging stations, but people are still buying these vehicles, which means that internal combustion engines end is definitely is in sight. Some of it reflects the remarkable abilities of Elon Musk, the company's founder, as a salesman, engineer, and as a man able to get the most out of his factory workers and the governments he deals with. So this seems to be talking about Elon Musk and why Tesla is selling because of his abilities. Right? Mr. Musk is selling a dream that the world wants to believe in. Okay, this last may be the most important factor in the story. So the most important factor is not that he's a salesman or an engineer or he gets the most out of his factory workers. It's the fact that he's selling a dream that the world wants to believe in. That is the most important aspect. The private car is a device of immense practical help. It's very practical and economic significance, but at the same time, a theater for myths of unattainable self-fulfillment. Okay, so initially when I started reading this passage, I thought we were going to talk more about Tesla and Elon Musk, but then there is a shift that has happened here because we are moving away from what Musk is doing to talking about what is this dream, right? So the private car, owning a car, is a theater for myths of unattainable self-fulfillment. So we are working towards a self-fulfillment that is unattainable, is what the author is basically saying. And this private car is a platform for that. It's a theater for myths of unattainable self-fulfillment. The one thing you will never see in a car advertisement is traffic, even though that is the element in which drivers spend their lives. So you spend all your lives in traffic, but no one talks about traffic and how the car can handle traffic. Every single driver in a traffic jam is trying to escape from it, yet it is the inevitable consequence of mass car ownership. It is an inevitable consequence, which means you're never going to get rid of traffic, is the point that he's trying to make here, right? As long as you have mass car ownership. So if everybody owns a car, it doesn't matter whether the car runs on a petrol engine or whether it runs on an electric engine, it is going to be, there's going to be traffic. Is this ultimate is the point that he's making here, and that is why it's unattainable self-fulfillment. You think that you're going to get out of the problem, but you're not. The sleek and swift electric car is at one level merely the most contemporary fantasy, most modern or most recent fantasy of autonomy and power. So in one way, it is similar. It is merely the latest version of our ideas and our need for autonomy and power. It's not that different. It's what he is trying to say in one way. But it might also disrupt our exterior landscapes nearly as much as a fossil fueled engine car did in the last century. So, in one way, it is merely a continuation of our need for autonomy and power, but at the same time, it can also cause a disruption in our exterior landscapes. So, what kind of disruption is it going to cause in the world around us? Electric cars would, of course, pollute far less. So, pollution is one thing than fossil fuel driven cars. Instead of oil reserves, the rarest materials for batteries. So, what is in demand goes from oil to batteries, would make undeserving despots and their dynasties fantastically rich. So, this is a similarity. This is not a difference, right? The point is that when we had fossil fueled cars, we depended a lot on oil reserves, and the despots are like autocratic rulers. Autocratic rulers who had oil reserves um, made their dynasties very rich. It's a reference to the Middle East. Now, the people who have the materials for batteries will become the ones who are rich. So, in that way, things are not going to change. Which regime becomes rich might change, but some regime is still going to become rich. But again, we're going back to a difference. Petrol stations would disappear. The air would be more breathable, and the streets as quiet as those of Venice. So now these are differences again. Pollution would be less, the air would be breathable, the streets would be quiet, petrol stations would disappear. These are differences. This isn't an unmixed good. The streets being quiet is not necessarily good. Cars that were as silent as bicycles would still be as dangerous as they are now to anyone they hit without an audible warning. So this is a possible problem that we could face because the cars are so silent. Apologize for the bad handwriting. Because the cars are so silent, you would not hear a car coming, and that could cause accidents. The dream goes further than that. Further than what? Further than just making cities clean. The electric cars of the future would be so thoroughly equipped with sensors and reaction mechanisms that they will never hit anyone. So now we are moving into a kind of hypothetical discussion where electric cars could go in the future. Not the current version of the electric cars that are being sold by Tesla and the others, but where it could go. The electric cars of the future will be so thoroughly equipped with sensors and reaction mechanisms that they will never hit anyone. Just as brakes don't let you skid today, the steering wheel of tomorrow will swerve you away from danger before you have even noticed it. So that is the fantasy version of the electric car, like no accidents would possibly happen. This is where the fantasy of autonomy comes full circle. The logical outcome of cars which need no driver is that they will become cars which need no owner either. So if it doesn't need a driver, why do I need to buy a car? That it's a potential future thing that he's talking about. Instead, they will work as taxis do, summoned at will, but only for the journeys we actually need. So we can order an autonomous car when we need it. This is the future towards which Uber is working. The ultimate development of the private car will be to reinvent public transport. So notice he's not talking about the development of the private car, he's talking about the development of the private car. Sorry. It's not talking about electric cars, but private car, as in privately owned cars, which we do even now, even if it has an internal combustion engine, right? So ultimately, we started with having private cars. It was petrol fueled initially. Now we are having electric cars, but having private ownership and all these developments that we are making will be towards public transport. Traffic jams will be abolished only when the private cars becomes a public utility. So if you don't have private cars at all, that is when traffic jams will go away. It is not about electric versus fossil fueled. What then will happen to our fantasies of independence? We'll all have to take to electrically powered bicycles. Okay. So that's kind of like a snide remark that he is making. If all cars become public transport, then do you have the independence that you craved when you did all these developments with private cars? Not necessarily. Then how will you get that independence to drive your own car, to have your own transport and all of that? You'll have to take to bicycles because cars will eventually become a public transport vehicle, is what he's saying here. Which of the following statements best reflects the author's argument? Okay, so what is the author's argument? His argument is that we're making all these changes to the cars because we want to have perfect autonomy in the private cars that we own. But private cars itself will not give you the independence that you're seeking because eventually, if we keep making these technological advances, then private cars are going to become public transportation. Let's look at the answer options. Hybrid and electrical vehicles signal the end of the age of internal combustion engines. Definitely a point he is making in the passage. But is that the ultimate point? Is that the argument that the author is making? It is more of a fact. It is right now happening. The internal combustion engine is already ending. But the author's argument is about what is likely to happen if we continue this trend into the future. So I'm going to eliminate that. Elon Musk is a remarkably gifted salesman. Also true, also something that the author is saying in the passage. But that's not the argument or the point that the author wants to establish in this passage. So that doesn't work either. The private car represents an unattainable myth of independence. Could potentially be the point that he's saying. Let's look at the last option as well. The future Uber car will be environmentally friendlier than even the Tesla. He's not talked about environment friendliness in the last couple of paragraphs. That's why he's talking about the future car. But he's finished talking about environmental friendliness in the earlier paragraphs when he's talking about the current version of the electric car itself. The comparison is not about environmental friendliness in the last couple of paras, it's about autonomy and independence, which is why D does not work either, and your answer has to be C. Moving on. The author points out all of the following about electric cars except the reliance on rare materials will support despotic rule. We discussed this. He's basically saying that instead of oil-based regimes, we'll have battery material-based regimes. So autocratic rule will be supported. It will continue. We talked about that as a similarity. So that is definitely true. It's an except question. So we're going to find 3 true answer options and eliminate them. They will reduce air and noise pollution. Yes, absolutely. He does mention that. They will not decrease the number of traffic jams. He mentions that in the second paragraph, and he says advertisements don't talk about traffic jams, and even if we have electric cars, we still have traffic jams. So he does mention that as well. They will ultimately undermine rather than further driver autonomy. Now, this is why you need to be careful. There is a very small distinction being made in the passage between the discussion on electric cars and the discussion on private cars. On one side, he's talking about what kind of car you're driving. Is it powered by an electric battery or is it powered by a petroleum? On the other side, he's also talking about private versus public transportation. When will driver autonomy become undermined? When you are talking about private cars, when you no longer have private cars and everything becomes public transportation, then they will undermine rather than further driver autonomy, because you no longer own or drive your car, you no longer have that independence. So please make that distinction. This is a tricky question that way. Passage is about, the question is about electric cars. D talks about private cars, and that is why you wouldn't go, D is not quite stated in the passage, and it's your answer. It's a little tricky. You need to notice in the passage when he's talking about electric cars and when he's talking about the future of private cars. In the last couple of paragraphs, it's not about how the car is fueled, but about whether it's publicly owned or privately owned. So be careful there. According to the author, the main reason for Tesla's remarkable sales is that. So he's talked about Tesla's sales. He's given quite a few factors. And if you remember, it was about Elon Musk's capabilities as an engineer, as a salesman, to bring out the best among his employees and then to work with governments. But then it also said that Mr. Musk is selling a dream that the world wants to believe in. This last may be the most important factor. So selling a dream that the world wants to believe in. And what is that dream? About autonomy and independence and unattainable self-fulfillment. This is the dream, and this is what you want the answer option to talk about. In the long run, the Tesla is more cost effective than fossil fuel driven cars. It's not about cost effectiveness. That's not the point. US government has announced a tax subsidy. It's not about whether the government has announced a tax subsidy. Remember, we want to talk about the dream, which is about autonomy, independence, unattainable self-fulfillment. The company is rapidly upscaling the number of specialized charging stations. Not the point. People believe in the autonomy represented by private cars. People believe in the dream, right? And he's selling a dream. That is the ultimate point that you want to establish. So the answer for question 3 is clearly D. Moving on to question number 4. The author comes to the conclusion that car drivers, what's his conclusion? The conclusion is that in the future, if this trend keeps continuing, then you will no longer have private transport. Everything will become public transport. And therefore, you will not have the autonomy, right? It is cars itself will become a public transport. It's not that you we'll look at the options, right? Car drivers will no longer own cars, but will have to use public transport. Kind of, yes, he's saying that, but the point is that he's not saying you won't have a car, you should take the bus. He's saying the concept of car itself will become a public transport. And we'll hold on to this. I'm not quite convinced it is the answer. Because this option seems to imply don't use a car, use a bus. So we'll hold on to it. Cars will be controlled by technology that is more efficient than car drivers. Yes, cars will be very having really good technology and sensors, and accidents will be prevented and all of that. But that's not the conclusion in the passage, right? The conclusion is about autonomy and independence. So I'm going to rule out B. Car drivers dream of autonomy, but the future may be public transport. Definitely something that he's saying. We're holding on to it. D. Electrically powered bicycles are the only way to achieve autonomy. He's not saying they are the only way. He's giving that as an example to say, well, Carson, what car? Maybe we should use bicycles. It's kind of more of a, he's trying to kind of be humorous in making that point. That's not his ultimate point in the passage, so I'm going to eliminate B. So look at your options. A and C are both very close because one is saying the future is public transport, and another is saying car drivers will have to use public transport. But why would they have to use public transport? Because they're not going to realize their dream of autonomy. For the fact that they dream of autonomy, but just for those words, C is a more attractive answer option because it captures the why. Why will you have to use public transport? A just says they won't have cars, they will use public transport. But why? Because your dream of this fulfillment is unattainable and you're not going to have it, is the point that he's been kind of touching on from the second paragraph and trying to make. Autonomy and independence are going to be taken away in our effort to go towards autonomy and independence, is the point. And so the best answer would be C. Also not a very easy question, not a very straightforward set of answer options. In para 5 and 6, the author provides an example of Uber to argue that. So why are we talking about Uber? Because then cars can be just summoned because they're driverless. You don't need to own a car, which means you're moving towards cars as a public transport, kind of like a taxi. Every car as a taxi, right? So we'll look at the options. In the future, electric cars will be equipped with mechanisms that prevent collisions. Yes, he says that, but it was earlier when he's talking about electric cars in general and how they can prevent accidents, not about Uber. So this is not your option. In the future, traffic jams will not exist. Well, he just said that if private cars become public, then traffic jams will come down, but will not exist at all. He's not making a claim. It won't be as much. It won't be as much a part of reality. And the point is not about traffic jams. The point is about autonomy and independence. In the future, the private car will be transformed into a form of public transportation. He says that. We'll hold on to it. In the future, Uber rides will outstrip Tesla sales. He's not saying Uber will outstrip Tesla. It's not a comparison. So point is that the car will become a part of public transport. That's what Uber wants, at least. They want every car to be an Uber, right? So the answer would be C. Our final question of the day. In para 6, the author mentions electrically powered bicycles to argue that. So what does he say? Cars are not going to give you autonomy. If you want autonomy, one way you could get that is to move to electrically powered bicycles. So let's see which of the options kind of tell you that. If Elon Musk were a true visionary, now just starting off to read the option, you know that electrically powered bicycles has nothing to do with Elon Musk, right? If Elon Musk were a true visionary, he would invest funds in developing electric bicycles. We're not talking about what he should be selling. That's definitely out. Our fantasies of autonomy might unexpectedly require us to consider electric bicycles. Yes, because we're not going to get that in cars anymore. Hold on to B for sure. In terms of environmental friendliness and safety, electric bicycles rather than electric cars are the future. It is not in terms of environmental friendliness and safety. It is only in terms of autonomy and independence. So we're going to rule out C as well. Because as long as it's electric, it's environmentally friendly. Electric buses are the best form. Start reading and then you stop. There's no mention of electric buses being the best form of public transport. So that's clearly an incorrect option. We can rule it out. So the best option for this question would be B.